I don't think I ever really believed everything.
And I realized that quite a few of the things didn't hold water.
The actual religions were man-made from wherever.
God? Who's God? What's God?
I think skepticism really is the first step.
Scientific zest and zeal for the real world.
That was it. I was an atheist from then on.
The blood policy, which has been in place for decades, has changed.
Hi, I'm Red.
And I'm Susan, and welcome to The Road to Atheism. And this is our friend, Don Albert, who is here to be interviewed on how he became one of us.
Welcome to the show, Don.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, glad to see you. Your experience, and could you tell us a little about your background when you were young, when your parents raised you, and get an idea as to the flow, take it from that point, okay?
Sure. I grew up first in Brooklyn and then in upstate New York, and I did not know that my parents were atheists. They never bothered to tell me that. Mm-hmm. Of course, I had an absence of religion, and I noticed that other kids had a presence of religion. So I would go to the bar mitzvahs, and I would go to the other activities of some of my friends. And at some point in my early teens, I got interested, and I wanted to go see the church. And
which one?
Well, it was a Methodist church.
Okay.
Because I thought my mother was a Methodist. I mean, she was, but I didn't realize she was also an atheist. So I went, and I know easily looking back on it that I was really trying to find something believable because that was fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I wanted something fantastic. So my parents weren't very happy when I came home, and I'm told that I wanted to say grace at a meal. I don't remember that ever having occurred, but both of my parents tell me about it. So I tried that, and then I tried it again a couple of years later, and I think finally the third time that I tried to believe things like that, I was a teenager. I was an older teenager, 17 or 18, and I managed to get myself to believe it. So I wound up believing there was a God, and then within a year of that happening, I found Jehovah's Witnesses, which was life-changing, to say the least.
In which way?
Well, I found ready-made answers to the right and wrongs, morality, which I found great. I wanted someone else to decide that because I found it very confusing at that age. Mm-hmm. And I was in the city then. I was living on my own, and I didn't have family around, and I didn't realize it. But I think I also wanted to be part of a group, and there it was. And I didn't even realize that was what was drawing me until I left 20 years later.
20 years later it took.
There was a girl.
Did you
getting you in or getting you out?
Both.
Oh.
Could you describe some of the practices that Jehovah's Witnesses, how they, I don't want to say brainwash you, but at least how they could encourage you to follow.
It's funny. They do it by using words like encourage when the right word is brainwash. Mm-hmm. Because, to encourage, to strengthen someone's heart, should imply that it's what that person actually wants to do. But they use the word encourage and many, many other words deceptively in very sly ways. And they use literature and all sorts of propaganda. And the real power is the fact that it's a group of very, very nice people. They attract nice people. They attract people who want to see a better world, who want to be nice to their neighbors. And they give them the Bible, but they give them a very specific feeding program of it, right, so that the right thoughts that match their doctrines are believable. And I fell for it.
It is said that if you disagree with them or you have problems with the belief, et cetera, that you're ostracized from the group.
That's correct.
So? Could you tell us a little about that, please?
Sure. I'll just tell you, I can cut straight to my experience. When I was about 38, I gave it some more thought. It happened a couple of times along the way, but this time I really had to start facing things. And I realized that quite a few of the things didn't hold water, and it was not possible for me to continue to believe them. After 9/11, that changed a few things too, because I realized I was angry at radical Islam for feeling the people who were committing certain things were felt that it was appropriate to kill people, or in other ways force them to either believe what you believe or not. And I thought that was intrinsically wrong. Mm-hmm. And
how did that tie in with or against?
I couldn't fight the fact or avoid it that they didn't get that idea on their own. It had come from the Bible directly, and it was
the Muslims, not I think the Quran. Right?
Yeah, well, they got it from the Bible. It came from the Bible. That's where Muhammad got it.
Yes,
and
yes,
then
that-
it wound
that
up
way,
in
yes.
the Quran. Mm-hmm. The fundamental principle that belief is something that can be legislated or enforced is endemic to the Bible.
It's true.
There's no missing it. Once you're aware of it, I knew I had a problem, and it took me about 4.5 more years before I had to get out.
So that was the point in which you started to think differently from the group, so to speak.
Yes, and to your question, I spoke to a couple of I was an elder at the time, and I spoke to a couple of other elders about it, and they did not disfellowship me, which is the Jehovah's Witness term for excommunication.
That's right.
Because I knew how to walk the line to avoid that outcome. But what they did was just as good. They told everybody, and I had over 1,000 friends in New York within that organization, and one person communicated with me over the next 18 months before I finally...
Amazing.
I wound up getting myself disfellowship by putting a blog post on richarddawkins.net about how to talk to Jehovah's Witnesses. And they said, that's a move of disassociation. They were right.
That's the way they say that, huh?
And the other 999 friends haven't
Not a
spoken
word.
to you?
Not a word.
Not a word.
That's what happened.
And that was without me having been excommunicated. So really, I realized at that moment, okay, it is completely about fear. These people are not afraid of Armageddon. They may be some, but the real fear
It's excommunication.
is excommunication.
Amazing.
That's the glue that holds the whole thing together, because everyone's afraid to question.
Was there anything else that might have started to make you think differently, whether it be science or medicine or other things that have occurred and that just didn't quite gel?
I worked in medicine at the time, and unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. It didn't help me, because when I got into discussions about the medical management of blood, which is a Jehovah's Witness issue, because
right.
they feel that...
They don't take transfusions?
Yeah, sort of. That's changed a lot recently, but that's the idea, and at least that's what they claim. And I would talk to my doctor friends about it, and because I was more up on how to talk about it, I would win arguments that I shouldn't have won. I had that experience often. You go to knock on people's doors, they're not ready. Even if they know more than you do, they're not ready for the conversation, and you are. So it's not really a fair fight.
Right.
And on occasion, on occasion though, I'd get somebody who was ready no matter what, and then it would be kind of startling to have thoughts in my head that were a problem. But there were several things along the way. Once, I was asked to conduct a Bible study with a man named Ed Klein. I'm proud to say his name. I'm very impressed with this man. And he was the head of a Jewish organization, and I can't remember the exact name, but they're in Fresh Meadows, and he's easy to Google. And they're a society for secular Judaism, or something close to that. And I went in, and he was very, very nice, and we had our little Bible study where, the Jehovah's Witness basically tries to indoctrinate the other person, right?
Of course.
And I think he could have nailed me at a lot of points now that I know who he is. But he chose to get me on the issue of the Bible's view of women, and we were talking about it, and I had all of my great little cherry-picked arguments ready. And he calmly listened, and then he said, well, you realize that in the Bible, women are considered property. And that one word, I
opened your mind.
I wanted to argue back, and I was running through scriptures in my mind, zoom, 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 zoom. And there was no arguing with that. It was a slam dunk case.
Misogyny is very, very rampant in the Bible.
Yeah, but the funny, if he would have used that word, I would have said, but no, look at this, look at that. But I couldn't argue property. There are certain things that Jehovah's Witnesses can get around for the temporary, and there are certain things that they can't, and that's the reason that they enforce the shunning policy. Because once you know the arguments and then you find out that they're fallacious, you are a problem.
Oh boy.
Because if you're a fellow witness, I could just say, hey, can I show you a couple things we believe, and let's see if that's really true, and it is a real problem, and they get very frightened.
Okay, so one was the fact that women are considered property. Was there anything else there that?
Yeah, actually, there was a blood issue thing. This was a few years before that. I had my cousin visit, and he is a medical physicist, and meaning he works with the equipment for radiological testing that uses nuclear elements. And his wife is a radiologist, and I think that's how they met. And they had a son, and he was with them. They visited my wife and me, and they were very gracious, and they listened. They were just wonderfully easy to talk to.
And you were proselytizing about
Oh well, yeah, we were cool, but yeah, we were trying to.
Okay.
And then finally, before they left, we were talking about it again, and they listened wonderfully. And that's really good points, really good points. And he said the following. He said, even though what you're saying makes a lot of sense, I can't imagine why God, and he said it like this, and I know he's an atheist. I know it. But he was very conciliatory. He said, I can't imagine why God would want me to make a decision that would end the life of my son. His son is right there next to him. And he says, I can't imagine why he would expect me to do that. And
Abraham.
Yes.
I couldn't go anywhere with it. I couldn't go to Abraham or anything because part of me was iffy about whether or not it was true in the first place. And this put a crack in everything because it made me aware of the fact that I might be willing to give up my life for my belief. But to choose to give up my child's life, what if the child grows up and doesn't believe it? Now I just committed murder. And there was I had it in my head, and I knew that because I didn't have children, I couldn't even disrespect him and try to say that there was another viewpoint. I just said, oh, okay, and let it go. And I was up till 5 that morning thinking. Yeah.
So your wife was also a Jehovah's Witness?
Yes, she was raised as one.
Did your marriage survive your departure?
No, it did not.
Oh dear.
No. The blood policy, which has been in place for decades, has changed many times, and they've gotten into trouble in some countries, big trouble about it. And so what they've done in Belgium especially, they had to work things out so that they wouldn't be under ban. And they finally fought it out and compromised, and they came up with this line that everything is really up to the individual. That's a lie, because if I as an individual decide, well, I don't believe that there's a problem with it, they'll say, and I don't even say it, if I just get a transfusion, but I don't then apologize and repent in dust and ashes, I will not be excommunicated. They will simply announce that I've excommunicated myself, and the reaction of people is exactly the same. Gotcha. So,
but that's if you announce it.
No, if they find out that I did it, and I don't say, oh, I was scared, I broke down, I'm so sorry. But up before 2000 and 2006, they started allowing all sorts of, it was before that, but now it's explicit that they allow fractions of blood. And basically, if you do a search on this, you'll find out that they allow over 99% of the volume of blood you are allowed to take in if it's first separated into components, which is hilariously difficult to try to defend either scripturally or logically.
Of course.
And their backs are against the wall now because they've come out and said these things to the European Human Rights Commission and some other large agencies, and it's on record. We now have the internet, and the exposure of it is happening very, very quickly.
Wow, so
and people are
between a
finding
rock and a
out.
hard place. Then.
Yeah, they're in trouble on that and many other
And
issues.
what about legal issues? What about if a person dies because they don't get the transfusion, et cetera, et cetera?
Well,
what happens then?
Wrongful death suits over that are probably next. But their legal troubles are more now in terms of child predators.
Right.
Because their policies on that are archaic as well, and they don't want to change them.
Tell us a little about that.
In a nutshell, up until just a few years ago, every time a person would claim that they had been molested, and this is true in many churches, they would basically settle out of court. And they would pay people off, and that would be the end of it, and they'd go away. A woman named Candace Conti, a young woman, decided that wasn't going to happen, and so she wanted to go to trial, and she asked for damages of 144,000 pennies, because Jehovah's Witnesses believe that 144,000 humans go to heaven to rule over the rest of us. And so she used that number and asked for, basically $1,440, which is nothing considering the horrible story of what happened to her. And the jury came back and awarded $28 million in punitive damages, $28 million and $1, and they said the one was an exclamation point. And it's since been reduced to about $11 million, but it's almost done. The appeals process is almost over, and since then, the floodgates have opened, and there are, I think, a dozen cases.
Many other incidents.
There are over a dozen cases now that are going.
There's a group that's in Oregon. They're having a legal problem right now, and the reason for that, and they've had it for the last couple of years. One of them, I can tell you, was the fact that they were holding hands, hanging around, praying for a young 13-year-old, and they prayed and prayed and sang songs. 13-year-old died. And they found out later that she just needed insulin. Okay, and now it's a court case, and they're very concerned. There have been some other court cases on it, but that's one of the problems that they have there. Another example of what happens when you have a lawsuit come against you. You mentioned on something else internationally, and that's being banned from a country. You also have a lot of things going on these days, thanks to science and the internet.
That's right. Thanks to science and the internet, the whole house of cards is on its way down.
That's right.
If I got into the theology of Jehovah's Witnesses, it would truly be a waste of time, I promise. But I fell for it because I was 18. Right. As I said, there was a girl who I loved very much. And
the one who became your wife?
Yes.
Or? Oh, dear.
Yeah. And anyway, I fooled myself into it. But when I finally realized...
Didn't stick.
When I realized that I was having problems with it, I picked up a book called The End of Faith by Sam Harris. And when I read books like that as a witness, I would always say, well, of course, he's finding fault with religion, religion's terrible. We're different, right? And so I would try to find the things that I could argue back with Sam Harris about, but there were precious few of them. And then I read The God Delusion. And in one sentence, it was over. It's the first sentence from chapter 2, which says the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction, colon, description of adjectives
of all that,
or
yes,
nouns.
that's right.
And I couldn't argue with a single one. Infanticidal. Well, that's true.
Everything you can think of.
From there, it was pretty easy.
Now, I don't know if it's whether it's Jehovah's Witness or whether it's the other group, but there's one that the leaders since 1918, 1927, 1930, it goes on and on with each of the leaders have said that the world is going to come to an end.
Oh, that's Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay. And every time they said that, it didn't happen.
No,
obviously.
It did. This is a
but
dream.
the whole thing is that they lost their position as the head, and they lost a lot of people who were part of their organization.
Okay, well,
Can you tell us a little about it?
If it's Jehovah's Witnesses, they didn't lose their positions. But a lot of people left, and there were some big prophecies. They had said that 1874 was going to be the end of something, and then when that didn't happen, they said, well, that's Christ's return invisibly, and 1914 will be the end of the world. And then when that didn't happen, it was 1915. This is all, they're a publishing company. It's all documented.
And I have a shirt that says repent, and it mentions all of those
dates.
Different dates. Right.
Hilarious. 1915 came and went, and eventually they said, well, 1914 was the invisible presence. And at the end of, only one generation is going to see it. And, and then now it's 100 years since then. They're still kind of holding on to it, but they don't talk about it as, bombastically. And
well, didn't Jehovah's Witnesses come out of Robert Miller way back in the 19th century, who went through the whole thing about predicting
the Millerites and the Adventists? There's a lot of that. The history is kind of fascinating if you're into that kind of thing. But as far as from an outside perspective, it's psychology. It is a high control cult. High control. As soon as you start questioning things, someone's going to start talking to you, and if you start arguing with it, you're on your way out. Yeah. And you'll lose your family.
So over the years now, with your job, or has there been any problems as far as work, as far as social, other than when you mentioned about your wife or your ex?
For being an atheist?
Yes.
I would say there's been fewer problems than I had by being a Jehovah's Witness.
How do you handle it? What do you say, and what do you do, or what do you?
Oh well,
do?
I'm a private tutor, so it doesn't really come up. And I'm working with kids, so I don't really talk about religion with them. Critical thinking, of course, is a big part of what I'm showing them, and that's a pleasure. But I don't really have any problems with it. Although I have lost a very large number of friends
Associated with Jehovah's
The
Witnesses.
ex-Jehovah's.
No, I lost all of them.
Oh,
I mean, well, when Facebook, became popular, and eventually you start getting, people remember you, and you hook up with all of these people. Hook up in the old sense of the term. You reacquaint yourself with people, and then when I make posts, and I'm not hostile. I'm very, very nice about it. I think
You're considering.
I first of all, I think people have the right to choose. Well, maybe they're not choosing it, but I think people have the right to be free to follow whatever their heart tells them to follow if they're not hurting other people. And I think some people use it and try to bring out the best of themselves. So I'm very conciliatory about it. But I will post things, and I won't hide the fact. I'm not afraid of the A word. I think it's very important that, if we want to talk about it, we don't run away from it. If we don't want to talk about it, that's fine. Some people don't want to talk about religion for personal reasons. But I would post these things, and, literally hundreds of people who I thought were friends just ran away from me scared.
No.
And there's really nothing. It's not that they're shunning me, but they're a little bit afraid, and they think it's crazy.
That's USA. The Pew Research did a study a couple of years ago and found out that 64% of the people in the United States don't believe in evolution. And that 1 out of 4, 1 out of 8 believe that the sun travels around the earth.
That part's a little scarier to me.
Very much so.
Okay, that's very frightening. But I was one of the many, many, many people who did not believe in evolution. And I thought I had very strong arguments against it. It's incredible how easy it is to
see the other side when
to protect that position when you're in it,
right, and
really believe it. And I always said, when I was a witness, I was never afraid to say, if evolution is proved, I'm done with this. It's not true. The whole thing falls apart. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Bible history of humans, 6,000 some odd years back, is accurate, but the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, and so that gives them a little bit of.
They're playing the game the way the
so
Pope
who
is
built
doing,
these 12,000-year-old cities?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, if you look at the history of Egypt, the pyramids,
that's right,
and there's a flood that's supposed to have happened in 2370.
2348 BC.
You have a big problem.
That's right.
Because there's no water damage. But if you ever really want to, you can grab some good old Jehovah's Witness literature and see how far they're willing to bend over backwards. And this, now we get outside of Jehovah's Witnesses. Those who really want to hold on to a belief will go so far to support it, and will find the few quotes they can find. Dawkins had a field day with Jehovah's Witnesses, the God of the gaps. But if you probably read The God Delusion, he spends a considerable amount of time talking about how the Watchtower completely took his quotes out of context. When I read that, it was laughable, because I knew those quotes and I thought that I had checked.
And that's what did it. That's one of the things that did it.
It was maybe the last straw,
Gotcha.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Mostly what we're all trying to do is raise awareness. There's a group called Advocates for the Awareness of Watchtower Abuses, awa.co.
Interesting.
And many other groups too, jwfacts.org, jwsurvey.org, one was .com, whatever. There's so many groups of this, and I think that organization is on its way out.
Is there anything you would like to tell our audience, something, a message or something that you feel is important that they should know? Either it's about that group or your history or anything else.
Sure. About as atheists, I think, and I said this at the brunch too, it's very important that atheists, if they're willing, engage Jehovah's Witnesses. If atheists can just get a little bit up on what those arguments are, it's not that hard to do.
Some of the questions that you would say that we should know to ask them.
Yeah, there are. There are
them.
quite a few very, very pointed questions. Well, a simple question to ask is, if you see them on the subway, say, "I have a question. If I were to join your religion, and then later I would decide that I don't believe it anymore, is there a punishment for that?" And let them try to lie their way out of it.
Okay, that's one. That's good. That's good.
If your own children, you can ask, leave the religion after being baptized, will you shun them?
What age are they baptized?
Well, that's another problem. Baptism is a verbal contract before a large audience where you say yes to two questions, one of which marries you to the religion. Fascinating.
So you have to be a certain age for that.
No.
A child?
Yeah, you can be.
Is going to say yes or no and supposed to think intelligently, cognitively?
Not only that, it could be argued that they're thinking cognitively. They're thinking, but they certainly wouldn't have the experience to make a mature decision, one that would stand up legally, right? So since it's a contract, I think as soon as somebody decides to go after them for that, they're going to be even in more trouble, because now you have a minor, and many of them are minors. They encourage kids as young as 12 or even 10 or sometimes younger to get baptized. They've always done that. And a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses think that's crazy, by the way. But the organization teaches that, and then that contract, and the reason we know it's a contract is that it is enforced. Because then if you do leave, the organization is told from the top down, in no uncertain terms, to shun you. Gotcha. Not even say hello, and they even
Your
come
own
out and
child?
say yes. Don't even email them.
Okay, so as a question to ask them is the fact that would they shun their child if for some reason they go against their baptismal?
There could be a better way to do it though, because they could still say no, I would never do that, and then the pressure comes from the elders and the organization to do it. Is it Watchtower policy that those who disagree with the organization in anything and say so are kicked out of the organization and taken away from their families?
Okay, well.
And let them lie about that. And if you want to get into it with them, I think atheists are perfect for this, because I mean there are many atheists who are not active like New York City atheists, but those who are out and active, I almost feel it's almost a responsibility. I would want to say I would want to try to encourage you to do that. Nicely bring up the questions and let them think. And actually, what I will be doing is blogging about exactly what those questions are.
Well, you have to come to tabling with us, because they've opened up a little stand next to us, and come next season, we will want you to be able there to ask them those questions. And we certainly appreciate you coming on here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
You're very
and
welcome.
We're looking forward to seeing you.